So now in this section, I want to answer the question of how do I select a topology? So we're going to talk about viewing the various racks that are available and identifying the topologies within them. So the first bullet point here, viewing the different racks are available, you've already seen that right here. I'll zoom in on this again. These are the various racks that we currently have available through our rack rental system. And so now the question is, okay, well, what topology does a particular rack have? Well, all of these racks you can see here have a button called the Rack Rental Guide that's associated with them. So for example, if we're thinking about the CCNA and CCNP, if that's what you're studying for, it makes the most sense to rent time on the NA and the NP routing and switching racks. So let's take a look at this. Let's click on the Rack Rental Guide. And usually somewhere towards the very beginning, it will show you the topology of what the rack looks like, how it's set up, how it's cabled. So here's an example. You can see visually that the CCNA and CCNP racks give you a total of 4 routers that you have access to, that you can configure, as well as 3 switches. This shows you here your LAN connections, your Ethernet connections. Further on down, you can see what your WAN connections are. And you can see here that there's 2 routers that are connected to your rack that you don't have access to. For example, the backbone router 1, which is actually serving as a frame relay switch, as well as the backbone router 2. Backbone router 2 is already pre-configured to inject like RIP routes and OSPF routes and IPv6 routes. So these routers are here as a tool to connect things together, but you can't actually access these routers. But you can see here how everything is cabled up and connected. So that gives you an idea. If I go back, for example, to the CCIE routing and switching V5 racks, I can click on the Rack Rental Guide. And on the left, it says Contents. All these are the same. If you click on it, it opens it up, it expands it. And you can see here, the 3rd chapter down is, actually the 4th chapter down, V5 Lab Rack Wiring Diagrams. So you can click on that. It says Physical LAN Cabling. You can click on that. And this shows you how the CCIE rack is put together. Now in this particular case, you have 4 physical switches, but then all of your routers are virtual routers. So these 4 physical switches have physical fast Ethernet connections between them, and then one of the switches has a fast Ethernet connection into a server. And that server is hosting our virtual routers. And you can scroll down here a little bit further and see how those virtual routers are connected to a virtual switch, and then the virtual switch connects back to the physical switches. Now, if you're preparing for your CCNA or your CCNP, this is overkill. You don't need this. One of the things I actually like about the CCNA and CCNP racks, if I go back to those, is if we take a look at this, this is all physical equipment. So these are actual real routers, real physical chassis, as well as real switches all together. This is not virtualized, at least as of the time of this recording, which is December of 2016, this is all physical equipment. So the takeaway from this is on any of these racks right here, on any of them you should be able to click on the Rack Rental Guide. For example, if we click on Collaboration, the Rack Rental Guide, and somewhere in this Rack Rental Guide, it should give you a topology diagram showing how everything is connected. Here we go, Lab Rack Diagram. You can see here in the Collaboration, a lot of stuff that's connected to that. So certainly before you rent time on any of these racks, you'll want to go through the rack diagram, see what's there, familiarize yourself with how things are connected. And actually what I'd recommend doing is before you schedule and you rent time, once you select a rack, print out that picture. As a matter of fact, print out multiple copies of it, because you're going to want to be able to use that to draw your IP addresses on, to draw, where you're going to be creating your VLANs, and just to make sure you're familiar with it. Remember, you're going to be spending time per hour on here. You don't want to waste that time referring back to the diagram over and over and over again to remember how things are cabled and how things are connected. Ideally, you would have as much of the diagram memorized as possible before you even start your lab. That way you don't have to waste time going back and forth. So that hopefully answers the question about how do you view the different racks that are available and what do the topologies look like within each of those racks.